Hi guys, it is Aoife from Fred Weasley Died Laughing, and I am here with my weekly wrap up. And I briefly talked about the first book that I finished this week last week because I was just about halfway through it, and that was My Life Next Door by Huntley Fitzpatrick, which is a YA contemporary book which follows a girl called Sam who has always been obsessed with the family that lives right next door to her, and she's never been really allowed to socialise with this family because her mother is a little bit of a snob and feels like the family is beneath them, and so she's always kind of studied them from afar. And then one night she ends up talking to one of the sons from the family who's around the same age as her. His name is Jace, and immediately this kind of lovely relationship kind of starts blossoming between them, and a romance ensues. This was just a very sweet, lovely, summery romance, which was perfect for the summertime. It's perfect for this just really cute story that just gives you all those butterfly feelings. As I was saying last week, Jace really quickly became one of my favourite boyfriend characters of all time because he was just so gorgeously sweet and understanding and respectful, and I just really loved him. One of the amazing things I loved about this book was how organic I felt like the relationship was. It didn't feel forced at all. It didn't seem like they were being pushed together by the author. The chemistry between the characters was so genuine, like you couldn't help but see them together, like they had to be together. That's all, like that's what had to happen, and it was just so lovely and sweet the way it kind of slowly built up between this nice little friendship to the first date, to the kiss, and then a little bit down the line it's obvious that they do want to sleep together, but they are both virgins, and they both have this really lovely conversation about their first time, about how they want it to happen, how they want to be safe, and it's just this really great, refreshing take on sex that I think is so important to have in these kind of books. And they go out to the pharmacy and they pick out condoms together, and it's just like you don't see that a lot in books, and you kind of sometimes see it as like it being the boy's job maybe to go and get the condom, or the girl's job to go and get a pill or whatever it is that she decides that she wants to do. But to see them do it together and go out together and talk about it and be like, oh well, like what kind do you want, and what kind do you think you prefer, and them just being like, oh well, we'll just try a few different types and see what we like together, and like that kind of thing is just like, it's a little bit funny, and you know, it can be a little bit cringy at times, but the fact that it's there is just so refreshing for me, and that's kind of the things I love to see in books because I think it is so important. So I really love to see that. This book does kind of have the missing, or the missing parent trope in a bit, where Sam's mum is a very busy person. She is running for Senate, I think, so she is off doing her own thing most of the time, and then now and again she'll swoop in and try and lay down the law with Sam, and it's kind of a little bit frustrating, and I feel like it wasn't quite as it didn't quite wrap up as nicely as I wanted it to do, and I feel like we didn't get all the answers, or it wasn't as, I don't know, it just didn't gel as much in the end as I wanted to, and there was also things that were left kind of unconcluded with her best friend. I felt like there was a storyline there that never really got a conclusion, and there was a pretty good storyline about another friend of Sam's who was dealing with addiction, and seeing that kind of storyline being played out was actually quite nice to see, and the friendships he strikes up in the story, he kind of goes from being a very unbearable character to someone who's very nice at the end of it, and that was a very nice journey to see as well. So I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars in the end. I really enjoyed it. It's one of my favourite contemporaries, I think, and Jace is definitely one of my top book boyfriends of all time because I loved him. After that I picked up The Way of All Flesh by Ambrose Parry. This is a historical kind of crime novel that I picked up from NetGalley, and this is set in Edinburgh in 1857, I think, and we are following this character called Will Raven, and he is training to be a midwife in Edinburgh, and he starts his apprenticeship with this doctor. At the start of the book we see Will find this woman he knows who is a prostitute, and he finds her dead in her room, and it kind of seems like she died in a lot of agony, and he feels like there's something kind of weird going on there, that it wasn't obviously a natural death. He thinks someone murdered her, and then as the story continues, Raven finds more women who have died in a similar manner, and he feels like there's someone out there doing this to the women, and it seems to be related to abortions, and possibly a botched abortion, and so he is determined to try and figure out what is going on, and he ends up enlisting the help of the housemaid in the house that he's now living in with the doctor he is an apprentice to. Her name is Sarah, and she's very clever. She's the type of character who is very left very restricted by her role, the roles she can do as a woman, and she would love to go out and become a doctor herself or become a scientist, but she can't because she was never given the full education. Because she's a woman, she is destined to a life basically of serving the richer class, and yeah, she's very frustrated at just the limits of what she can do. So her and Raven kind of pair up to try and figure out what is going on, and we also see kind of Raven just going out and about and learning how to be a midwife. This story, like, I feel like it had a lot of potential, and it just ended up being a little bit boring for me. I didn't find myself wanting to pick it up. I just found parts of it were a bit of a drag. For me, it just wasn't that exciting, and I kind of feel like it was really obvious from the start who the culprit was as well. I wasn't really shocked by any reveals, which was kind of annoying. I will say I think the atmosphere was very, very good. It was like this dark kind of dreary atmosphere, and I think it really suited probably like the cold streets of Edinburgh at the time. And I think the descriptions we got of Edinburgh and the streets of Old Town and New Town in Edinburgh were really, really good, and I really enjoyed being able to picture that, because I was in Edinburgh a couple of years ago and I loved it, but I loved being able to picture possibly those same streets that I was on, but hundreds of years ago. So that was really great to see. I really, really enjoyed that. And I will say, if you are pregnant, or you're thinking of getting pregnant soon, don't read this book. There is a lot of, obviously, the medical practices back then were not as good as they are now. They weren't as good even in the 1900s. A lot of the practices are very brutal. You can see why a lot of women died in childbirth and why a lot of babies died. There's some procedures that are described that are extremely brutal and extremely distressing, and I think if you were a woman or a person who was pregnant and you were reading that, I think it would be highly distressing to not only be reading of what could have happened to you, but also what could have happened to your infant, and how the doctors, like, what they did to try and save the life of one or the other. And yeah, it was horrible. So yeah, I would really, really, really urge anyone who is pregnant or is hoping to be pregnant soon to not read this book, because I feel like it would just be too distressing. So yeah, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars in the end. Unfortunately, it just wasn't really one for me. The next book I read was Calamity by Libbie Hawker. This is a book I got on Amazon a couple of weeks ago. I love Calamity Jane. I love the story of Calamity Jane, and I saw this on Amazon a few weeks ago. I think it was only like 99p, so I picked it up, and then obviously with the very sad news this week of Doris Day dying, it got me thinking of Calamity Jane again. I remembered I bought this book, so I decided to pick it up and give it a read. This is basically a novelised version of Calamity Jane's life. And can I say, I actually didn't know that Calamity Jane was a real person. I always thought that she just was like this fictional character that was created probably like in old stories that then was recreated in the Hollywood movie. But she was actually a real person, which is really interesting. I never knew that. And like Wild Bill Hickok was a real person as well. So the start of this went really well for me, and I really enjoyed kind of seeing how Calamity Jane started and her real name, and like how she kind of got to that fame of Calamity Jane. It was a different way than I thought it was. So basically she is a prostitute for a lot of this book, for most of this book. She is a prostitute, which there is no shame in doing, but I was just quite surprised at that, because I didn't know Calamity Jane was a prostitute, because yeah, as I said, I've always just thought of Calamity in the Hollywood movie with Doris Day, so that was a little bit of a shock to me. And like I did like this book, but I kind of feel like there was a lot in it. Like at the start of the book, Calamity is saying she's like her name is Calamity because her life has been a calamity. Everything that she does ends up like being pretty shit, basically. And that's kind of what happened, and it kind of started getting to this point where I just kind of felt a little bit depressed reading the book, because I was kind of like, oh well, things are going right for her right now, but they probably are just going to end up being bad again because it's Calamity Jane and that's what happens to her. And it kind of just got a little bit like down in the dumps a bit, and I didn't really like feeling that, and I just kind of wanted it to end. And yeah, and I will say there was a bit, this book has kind of been being narrated as if Calamity is telling someone her story, and I feel like there was no build up to that at the start. It was like straight into her being like, when I was 12 years old, blah blah blah. There was no build up to who she's telling the story to, how that came about, none of that build up. So I was kind of being like, oh, but like, who is this person? Why do they want to know her story? Are they like writing a book? What's this? And like the end of it, it is explained a little bit, but I didn't really like that reveal at the end that was given to why she was telling her story to this person in this way. And I kind of felt it would have been better if we had this build up of someone going to her maybe on her deathbed and then her going into her story then. So yeah. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, I think, in the end. So yeah, it did end up being a little bit of a disappointment for me, unfortunately, but I think if you, like me, really like Calamity Jane, this might actually be really interesting for you to kind of figure out some of the real story behind the real person who was Calamity Jane. And then the last book I read this week was Girls with Sharp Sticks by Suzanne Young. This is kind of a, I don't know if I'd call it it's kind of a dystopian novel, but it's not too much of a dystopian novel. Like, it's not too much in the future, if you know what I mean. This is basically about this school, I think it's called the School of Innovations, and it's basically a school that is teaching these young girls how to be proper young ladies and really behaved, and they're eventually, like, their parents are apparently paying this massive tuition for them to go to this school and get this education. All their teachers are male. Basically they're kind of being told that they have to be utterly respectful to all the men in their lives. The men are the be all and end all, they are the kings, and they are just there to serve the men, and it's quite frustrating at times, I will say, as a woman, to read it. And we are following this one girl called Philomena, and we are seeing how she is starting to break the mold a little bit and starting to think things, and starting to think that things aren't completely right with this school, and things that they are being taught she feels like actually aren't right, and maybe she shouldn't be listening to the people who are in charge. And it's basically her starting to find her voice and find her freedom and find her courage to break away from this mold that she's been forced into. So it's quite exciting. I really enjoyed this. I felt like I loved the female friendship in it. There is just such a strong unit of not just like two girls. There is a group of girls who all love each other deeply. Like, they are sisters, basically, more like they're friends, they are sisters. They always want to be together. They won't go anywhere without each other. They look after each other, and it's just so lovely to see. I loved seeing that strong unit, that strong female force, which is so important, I think, in books to see, especially now, and especially with what is going on in the world right now. And I will say, with everything that's been going on with the abortion bans in Alabama, and being reminded of the same abortion ban basically in Northern Ireland this week, it's a very interesting book to be reading about this world where girls are completely under the control of men. And I'm wearing my repeal t-shirt jumper today because I was just feeling a little bit rebellious, and yeah, especially with reading this book too. So yeah, it's a very interesting time to read this book, but it does get you riled up a little bit, I will say that. So yeah, it was very interesting. It's a little bit like, I would say, Stepford Wives meets Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. I feel like if you smash them together, you'd probably get something along the lines of this book. But yeah, it was just, as I said, the female friendship in this was fabulous. I really kind of liked the dystopian techie edge to it that we got. The slow reveal was very good. I feel like it could have been a little bit, the start of it kind of did feel a little bit drawn out, I will say, so that could have been maybe a little bit quicker for me, and we could have gotten more information more quickly. And I'm pretty sure the way it ends, it seems like there's going to be a second book, so that'll be interesting to see what happens there. The end did leave me with a little bit more questions, and it didn't end in a complete cliffhanger, but I did have some more questions that I do want answered, and it does make me excited to read the next book whenever that does come out. So yeah, I will say definitely read this book, but do prepare to be angry at the world, and be ready to completely smash the patriarchy after reading this book, because that is how I feel. So yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. So that's everything I've read this week. Please let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys again next time. Bye!